Words have the power to start revolutions, build identities, and sometimes carry the weight of entire histories on their backs. But what happens when those words themselves become the battleground? Today, we're exploring the journey of two such words, Black and African American. How did these terms evolve? Why do they matter so much? And what do they tell us about the ever-changing landscape of identity in America? Welcome back to Bite-Sized Blackness, where we break down the big ideas shaping our world into bite-sized, easily digestible pieces. In today's video, we'll be diving deep into the complex histories of the terms Black and African American, exploring how they've been shaped by culture, politics, and the struggle for identity. By the end of this video, you'll not only understand why these words matter, but also how the language we use can both reflect and influence the world around us. Let's start at the very beginning. Africa, not just the continent, but the word itself. When you hear Africa, what comes to mind? A vast continent rich in culture, history, and diversity. That's certainly true, but the word Africa, as we know it, didn't always carry such weight. The term Africa was first coined by the Romans over 2,000 years ago. But here's the kicker. It didn't refer to the entire continent as we understand it today. Instead, Africa was the name the Romans gave to a small region in present-day Tunisia and northern Algeria, known then as Carthage. As the Roman Empire expanded, so did their use of the term Africa. But even then, it referred only to the northernmost parts of the continent. So how did this name come to represent an entire continent that is home to over 1.3 billion people and thousands of distinct cultures? The answer lies in the European exploration and colonization of Africa. As European powers moved further south, they brought the name with them, gradually applying it to more and more of the continent. The term Africa stuck, not because it was chosen by the people who lived there, but because it was imposed by outsiders. This imposition of a singular identity on a diverse continent is a theme that recurs throughout history, and is something we'll see again as we explore the terms Black and African American. But before we move on, it's important to note that the people who lived on the continent we now call Africa didn't see themselves as Africans. They identified with their specific tribes, regions, and cultures. The concept of a unified Africa is a product of European colonialism, a convenient label for a diverse and complex reality. And that brings us to our next question. Where did the term Black come from, and how did it come to be associated with people of African descent? The word Black has a long and complicated history, one that is deeply intertwined with the history of Europe and its interactions with Africa. In medieval Europe, the color black was associated with darkness, evil, and the unknown. These negative connotations were rooted in Christian theology, where light symbolized goodness and God, while darkness was linked to sin and the devil. As Europeans encountered the darker-skinned peoples of Africa, they projected these associations onto them, using the term Black not just to describe skin color, but to imply moral inferiority. This association of blackness with evil was not just a cultural quirk, it had real and devastating consequences. It provided a convenient justification for the transatlantic slave trade, one of the darkest chapters in human history. By dehumanizing people of African descent, Europeans were able to rationalize the brutal practice of slavery. The term Black was thus imbued with a deep and pervasive prejudice that would persist for centuries. But here's where things get interesting. While Black was used to justify oppression, it was also reclaimed by those it sought to oppress. Over time, people of African descent began to use the term Black as a symbol of pride and resistance. This reclamation wasn't just about turning a slur into a badge of honor. It was about challenging the very narratives that had been used to justify their subjugation. One of the most powerful examples of this reclamation came in the 20th century during the Civil Rights Movement. But before we get there, we need to understand the rise of another term, African American, came into prominence in the late 20th century, and its rise can be traced to a pivotal moment in 1988. That year, civil rights leader Reverend Jesse L. Jackson, speaking at a press conference in Chicago, called for the widespread adoption of African American as the preferred term for Black people in the United States. But why did Jackson advocate for this change, and why did it resonate with so many? Jackson argued that the term African American provided a sense of cultural and historical continuity. Unlike Black, which was often seen as a mere descriptor of skin color, African American connected people of African descent in the United States to a broader history and heritage. It acknowledged the African roots of Black Americans, as well as their unique experiences in America. In Jackson's words, to be called African American has cultural integrity. It puts us in our proper historical context. This was a powerful argument, and it came at a time when many Black Americans were seeking to reclaim and celebrate their African heritage. The term African American offered a way to assert an identity that was both distinct and connected to the rich and ancient history. It was seen as a way to move beyond the legacy of slavery and to affirm a positive and empowering identity. But the rise of African American wasn't just about reclaiming a sense of history, it was also about addressing the limitations and baggage of the term Black. As we've seen, Black carried with it a long history of negative connotations, rooted in centuries of prejudice and discrimination. For some, African American offered a way to distance themselves from that history and to emphasize a broader and more inclusive identity. However, not everyone agreed with this shift. For many, the term Black had been powerfully reclaimed during the Civil Rights Movement and the Black Power movement, and they were reluctant to abandon it. This brings us to the next chapter in our story, the reclamation of Black as a symbol of pride and resistance. The 1960s were a time of seismic change in the United States, and the struggle for civil rights was at the heart of it. During this period, the term Black underwent a dramatic transformation. No longer was it merely a descriptor of skin color. It became a powerful symbol of identity, pride, and resistance. One of the key figures in this transformation was Stokely Carmichael, a civil rights activist who played a crucial role in popularizing the term Black Power. In 1966, during the Meredith March Against Fear in Mississippi, Carmichael famously declared, "What we need is Black Power." This phrase captured the imagination of many young activists who saw it as a rallying cry for self-determination and empowerment. Black Power was more than just a slogan. It was a movement that sought to redefine what it meant to be Black in America. It rejected the idea that Blackness was something to be ashamed of, and instead celebrated it as a source of strength and pride. This movement found its most visible expression in the Black Panther Party, founded in 1966 by Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale in Oakland, California. The Panthers embraced the term Black and used it to assert their right to self-defense, self-determination, and political power. But the embrace of Black Power wasn't without controversy. Some civil rights leaders, including Martin Luther King Jr. and Roy Wilkins, were critical of the term. They worried that it would alienate white allies and fuel racial tensions. King, for instance, argued that Black Power could be seen as a form of racism in reverse, and he preferred the language of nonviolence and integration. Yet, for many Black Americans, Black Power represented a necessary and overdue shift in the struggle for civil rights. It was about taking control of their own destiny and refusing to be defined by the terms and expectations of others. This tension between the different approaches to civil rights and identity is a reminder that there has never been a single, unified Black experience or perspective. The debates over language and identity are as diverse as the people. So, where does that leave us today? With Black once again gaining prominence over African American, the conversation is far from over. In fact, it's more complex than ever. One of the most intriguing aspects of this ongoing conversation is the question of whether white should be capitalized in the same way as black. This might seem like a small detail, but it has sparked intense debate among scholars and activists. Some argue that capitalizing white acknowledges that whiteness is not just a skin color, but a social and political identity with its own history and power dynamics. They argue that by not capitalizing it, we risk perpetuating the myth of white neutrality or invisibility, as if whiteness is the default against which all other identities are measured. On the other hand, some worry that capitalizing white could inadvertently reinforce white supremacy by giving it a sense of legitimacy and importance. They argue that whiteness should be de-emphasized, not elevated, especially in a society that has long privileged white identity over all others. This debate is a microcosm of the larger conversation about race, identity, and language in America. It reflects the ways in which language is not just a mirror of reality, but a tool that can be used to shape and reshape that reality. As we continue to grapple with these issues, it's clear that the language we use to describe ourselves and each other will continue to evolve. In the end, what's in a name, as it turns out, quite a lot. The words Black and African American are not just labels, they are symbols, tools, and battlegrounds in the ongoing struggle for identity, recognition, and justice. They carry with them the weight of history, the hopes of the present, and the possibilities of the future. As we've seen, the language of identity is always in flux, shaped by the currents of culture, politics, and personal experience. And while the debates over these terms can be contentious, they are also a sign of something positive, a deep and ongoing engagement with the question of what it means to be human. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history, language, and identity. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Bite-Sized Blackness. We want to hear your thoughts. How do you see language shaping identity in your life and community? Let's keep the conversation going in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and keep questioning.